Initiating central control, 1d4 instantly stakes a claim and prepares queenside development, offering immediate strategic options. Initiating development, Black prepares to contest the center and hints at a flexible pawn structure. Solidifying central control, White immediately challenges Black's knight and stakes a claim in the heart of the board. Preparing to fianchetto the bishop, this move embraces the King's Indian setup. Developing the knight toward the center solidifies the pawn wedge and prepares for kingside castling. Establishing the fianchetto aims to control the long diagonal and prepare castling. Fortifying the center and preparing kingside castling, this move solidifies White's central pawn structure and ensures king safety. Solidifying the center and preparing to develop the queenside pieces is a sensible approach here. Preparing a kingside fianchetto, this move aims to bolster kingside defense and launch a central pawn push later. Bolstering the kingside and preparing to uncoil the bishop, this knight repositions to support a potential queenside advance. Solidifying control of the central dark squares, White prepares to castle and launch kingside expansion. Prioritizing king safety by tucking it away is a cornerstone of sound middle game preparation. Safely tucking the king away completes a crucial developmental stage, preparing for central pawn pushes and freeing up other pieces for dynamic action. Challenging the center immediately creates dynamic pawn play and opens lines for counterattack. Asserting central dominance, White immediately challenges Black's pawn thrust and opens lines for potential future piece activity. Retreating the rook offers crucial defensive support to the e5 pawn, a key strategic foothold in the center. Aiding development, this bishop prepares to unpin the knight and potentially support a central pawn push. Opening the e-file for potential pressure, Black initiates a pawn exchange that clarifies the central structure. Reclaiming the pawn with the knight immediately centers it, preparing to contest the d-file and potentially launch an attack. The knight aggressively occupies a central outpost, challenging White's pawn structure and eyeing potentially weak squares. Bolstering the queenside pawn chain, White prepares to develop the bishop and gain central space. Targeting the weak f2 square with knights creates an immediate tactical imbalance, forcing White to defend attentively. Repositioning the bishop to a more active diagonal, ready to influence the kingside and support potential pawn pushes. Reinforcing central control and preparing a pawn push, this move subtly redirects pressure toward White's queenside. Repositioning the knight to a more central square often unlocks attacking potential and controls key diagonals. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, Black aggressively challenges White's central control and opens avenues for attack. Dislodging that knight from its strong central outpost prevents any further kingside pawn storms. Realigning the knight to a more active square aims to improve piece coordination and prepare for future pawn breaks. Breaching Black's kingside pawn structure immediately disrupts their defensive harmony and opens avenues for queenside pressure. A bold recapture, shattering White's central pawn chain and opening diagonals for Black's bishops. Elevating the queen here clears the way for future operations and prepares to meet Black's aggressive pawn push head-on. Pushing the h-pawn creates space for the knight and prepares for an attack on the kingside, but it also weakens your own king's pawn shield. Initiating a rook lift to seize the open e-file, aiming to increase pressure on Black's central pawn structure. Centering the queen on d7 aims to connect the rooks and potentially support a pawn push on the kingside. Safeguarding the king amidst growing central pressure offers breathing room for White's queenside development. Securing the king's perimeter with an extra defender reinforces the central pawn structure against potential pawn pushes. Opening up the bishop to target the enemy king's haven is a bold maneuver, seeking to exploit the weakened kingside. A bold pawn thrust opens lines, but exposes the kingside significantly. Shifting the knight to this outpost might be a positional gambit, potentially sacrificing piece activity for central influence and a freer queen. Solidifying the queenside structure with a view toward pawn advances and potential rook activity. Unlocking the h-file, the bishop sacrifices itself to pry open attacking avenues near black's king. Sacrificing the bishop opens a powerful diagonal for your queen and queen's rook, targeting white's king. Initiating a pivotal skirmish for central control, this knight repositions to eye weaknesses and disrupt black's developing plans. Regrouping the bishop to a more active diagonal, preparing to contest the central light squares. Shifting the queen to c3 aims to increase pressure on black's queenside and potentially exploit discovered attacks or lines of play. Securing the queen's central influence and preparing a counterthrust. Initiating a knight repositioning dance, seeking a more active post on the kingside, aiming to bolster the beleaguered monarch. This repositions the rook to an open file, potentially preparing for central pawn advances or challenging white's piece placement. Seizing the open file after the pawn exchange, white aims to exploit the weakened kingside further. This knight's retreat to the 7th rank prepares for a potential pawn advance on the kingside, seeking to destabilize white's central pawn structure. A bold repositioning, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially seize the central files. Challenging the advanced knight with a subtle repositioning, aiming to disrupt white's central control. A bold foray, targeting the opponent's king and forcing a positional concession.